Hello, you're listening to episode 39 of the Raising Musos podcast, the podcast for parents who want to nurture their child's love of music and help them thrive in their learning journey. I'm your host. My name is Eliza Burgo. I'm also the music director. I'm also the director of a music school in Joondalup, located north of Perth in Western Australia. My school is Music Makers Academy, and we teach literally anyone between the ages of like 5 to 80 or 90, piano, harp, guitar, flute, violin, voice. And I started this podcast because I came across so many parents who didn't seem to have any idea what impact they could make in their child's music journey. They always sort of underestimated their impact. They didn't seem to know how to help their child, and that just led to not enough support at home, which then led to students quitting music because there was not enough support. And so today's topic is maybe something that you've thought about or you've considered doing, but you just don't know whether you should do it or not. And that is whether you should mention your child's learning disabilities to their instrumental teacher. So maybe your child has, autism or ADHD, ADD, Asperger's, dyslexia, and you might be wondering if it's worth mentioning that. And so I'm just here to tell you why it is probably a good reason to mention it, how you can bring it up. Also, why some parents hesitate sharing this type of information. But hopefully I can convince you that being upfront and honest with your instrumental teacher is the best move you can do for your child. So, why would parents hesitate sharing this kind of information? And so first of all, I want to acknowledge that it's not always easy to share, to say that about your child to someone else, especially a stranger, because you might not have really started lessons with the teacher, and then you just have to, to share this kind of personal thing to this person that you don't know, and it can be a little bit daunting. You might be asking yourself whether the teacher will suddenly see your child differently, whether the teacher will judge your child or underestimate your child based on their diagnosis or their disability. You might think that the teacher will blame everything on the disability of your child. You might even be wondering if it's really necessary to mention it, because you might just not realize that. You might think it doesn't make much difference in the context of a music lesson. And so these are all obviously very valid questions and concerns to have, especially if maybe you have tried different tutors and their reaction to your child's disability or diagnosis was that they didn't want to take your child on. But what you have to know is that a good music teacher isn't going to judge or label your child. Hopefully a good teacher, or just a good person in general, will try to understand your child and work with them rather than dismissing them. So now that I've sort of talked about that, let me tell you about why it is helpful to share this type of information probably as early as possible. And the reason is, so when you share a learning difficulty or a diagnosis or maybe like a specific need that your child has, you're actually communicating to the teacher that they're going to need to adapt their teaching, possibly, in order to be more effective, to be a better teacher for your child, okay? And so here's a few reasons why it's helpful to share this type of information. So number one is it helps to tailor the teaching approach. So for example, if your child has dyslexia, okay, the teacher may avoid reading music or text-heavy methods and instead rely more on auditory or visual cues. If your child has ADHD, for example, the teacher may know to plan more movement or break up instructions or just have a bit more variety in the lesson to sort of keep up with the attention span of your child. Number two is it builds empathy and patience. So if we, if we as teachers know that focus or memory is a bit of an issue with your child because of their, diagnosis, we're not going to assume that your child, was just acting up, wasn't listening, or doesn't care. We can sort of not blame, but we can put your child's behavior in a bigger context, and we can be more empathetic and not as angry. So we'll just keep adapting and we'll keep trying again to find something that works. And then the third reason is that it opens up communication between the teacher and you, the parent. So when teachers understand what's going on, they can keep parents better informed and offer more appropriate support. Not just during a lesson, but also for practice at home. Pardon me. And look, personal experience here. I have a student now, and I had a student in the past. And so let me talk about the student that I had in the past. It was actually one of my favorite students too. I was teaching him for a long time in a very kind of classical, traditional way. I was trying to teach him like music notation, how to read music. And he was just really struggling. He was struggling to an extent that was really surprising for his age. And also compared to younger students. And I was like, this is weird that he is still struggling to read music, even simple things. He just can't seem to understand how it works. And I just kept trying and trying and trying. And occasionally, especially around Christmas or Easter, he, would give me a card to wish me Happy Christmas or whatever. And I noticed that his spelling was also pretty bad. Again, pretty bad for his age, pretty bad compared to younger students. And so then it just sort of clicked in my head that he probably had dyslexia, and that everything that I was doing was it was not working for him just because of his dyslexia. And And sort of like once I sort of decided, you know, obviously like the parents didn't tell me anything. They didn't share this information. I don't know if they were even aware. And like again, I don't know if he ever had an official dyslexia diagnosis, but to me, his spelling was like all over the place. He struggled to read music, to name notes using the musical alphabet. He also would get the numbers mixed up, so like fingering, numbers for the fingers, he would get that wrong. And I was like, I don't understand like how to fix that. And then because he had trouble reading music, I had to show him how to play music. So I had to rote teach him everything. But he was really, really good at that. He was able to sort of play music by ear. And so for so long, I really tried hard to teach him how to read music. But eventually, once I sort of started to think to myself, maybe it's dyslexia. Because when I started teaching him, I had like very little experience. I was also quite young and I didn't know as much as I know now. I didn't even think of dyslexia at the time that I started teaching him. So it was not until like a couple of years later that I was like, oh, maybe that's what the problem is. And once I sort of figured this out for myself without the parents' input, I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna like have to teach him by rote like almost all the time. And I was fine with that. And then he was able to actually learn the repertoire like so much more quickly as well. Because I understood now that, maybe reading music is just not his thing, and that's just how he is, and there's nothing wrong with that. I just wish I had known sooner, because probably I would have taught him in a very different way. I wouldn't have relied so much on classical music repertoire, which is it's exclusively about reading music. And so if I had known that he was struggling with spelling, struggling with numbers, I would have probably tried to teach him piano in a different way. So that's an instance where I wish I had known about this early on. Another student that I have currently, very sweet girl, she's very sweet, very motivated to play her instrument, but she just like cannot sit. She's 9 years old. She just cannot sit still for like longer than a minute or two. She just gets distracted by everything around the room. If there's a whiteboard marker, she'll want to draw on the whiteboard. If there's a highlighter, she'll want to draw a picture. She just gets distracted by every single thing. And as a teacher, I was like, that is just so annoying. Like I would ask her to do something, she just like seems to not hear what I'm saying. She's not responding to it. It was almost like she was ignoring me sometimes. Or she would just start doing her own thing, and I'm just sitting there like, oh my gosh, I just have to she's like not respecting me. And it felt like a battle, and those lessons would just really drain me and made me feel as if I didn't have control. And then I just thought to myself, well, and again, like the parents didn't say anything. Sometimes the parents even sat in on the lessons and then just tried to like gently rein her back in to like focus, but it's oftentimes not very effective. And the teachers didn't communicate, the parents didn't communicate anything to me. So, and again, her behavior as a 9-year-old, it feels more like a 5-year-old's behavior, just like with the very short attention span. So anyway, I just have to figure this out by myself, but I've decided maybe she probably has like ADD, like attention deficit disorder, and that's why she just can't focus as well as other students. And I would say she's definitely more of the extreme kind of thing on the spectrum, right? So how has that, once that I decided that about my student, how did that change how I taught her? Well, yeah, it did actually change. So, I do always have a couple of activities lined up, but basically what I try and do is I get her to play a piece once. This might take like 30 minutes, 1 minute, and then she has to like walk around the room, do her thing. I let her do it because I'm like, actually, this is good for her to like walk around, to have this movement, to get distracted for like 2 seconds. Because when she's going to come back to the instrument, she's going to be able to focus for another minute. And so the entire lesson is just her playing for 1 minute, her walking around for 1 minute, playing again for 1 minute, walking around for 1 minute. And I feel like now I can work with that because when she is at the instrument, she can focus just long enough to play through what needs to be played. And she feels like she can be herself. There's no like conflict. I'm way more patient because I feel like when she is at the harp, she can follow my directions. So it's just like worked out a lot better for me to sort of self-diagnose her. And again, maybe she doesn't have anything, but it helps me in the way that I teach, to make lessons more enjoyable and to feel like they're less me always trying to like push and control her, which just doesn't work. But again, like I wish the parents maybe had told me this, but I don't know if she's ever had a proper diagnosis. So definitely, from the perspective of a teacher, it's really helpful to know this information because, as I said, we can find ways to work with that. But if we're left in the dark, we're going to assume this student might be just like, just have a very good focus. We're going to assume that they're going to be like an easy student to teach. And I don't mean that in the sense that that children with disabilities are like extremely hard to teach. But we definitely have experience teaching like easy students who, maybe are not going to talk very much. They listen very well. They follow all instructions. They don't react. They don't get distracted. They have like an amazing focus. Like I have students like that, but then I also have students on like the very opposite end of the spectrum. And so just sort of like having an idea of how a student is going to show up in lessons, it really sets us up to succeed in how we teach, which obviously leads to success in how your child learns and makes progress. Now, what I do want to say is that, sharing your child's disability or whatever diagnosis with your teacher will not lead to the teacher like pitying your child. Like I don't really pity any of my students. I just try to work with them. It also doesn't mean that we'll have super low expectations. Like say with like that student who's always very easily distracted, I have expectations that she can get through the grades and get really better and better at the harp, but maybe the progress will be a little bit slower than average just because a lot of the lesson time is spent on being distracted, okay? That's just because of how she is. And hopefully sharing this information with your tutor will not result in your child being treated differently in any kind of way. So you might know this, but teachers, we all already do quite a lot of differentiation between students, and we don't teach everyone the same. So the fact that your child might be a little bit on the spectrum is probably not gonna like affect us all that much, to be honest, because we're already teaching most people slightly differently. So hopefully I've convinced you to share with your tutor about your child's learning difficulties. But so you might be wondering like how to actually approach it and how to do it. So again, the best time to do it is as early as possible, even maybe before your child starts lessons or has a trial lesson. You can just sort of say, hey, I'd like to let you know that my child has been diagnosed or is actually working through a diagnosis for XYZ. And I thought it might be helpful to share what works well for them in these learning situations. And so then if you have any advice for the teacher on how your child behaves or what they need to follow instructions, that can be really beneficial as well. So for example, my child learns best with one instruction at a time, or they need lots of breaks or movements, otherwise they get too overwhelmed. My child needs visual reminders or hands-on activities to help them retain concepts. Or maybe sometimes they get anxious if they don't get it right away. So yeah, just keep the conversation focused on solutions, giving the teacher as many insights and recommendations. That is going to help the teacher provide a very positive learning environment for the child. So there we go. That's my take on whether or not you should share your child's learning disability with your tutor. So as a final thought, sharing your child's learning differences think of it as an act of advocacy on behalf of your child. It's a gift, as I said, for the teacher, because we're able to we'll have ideas for how to adapt our teaching to the needs and sort of to the style of your child. And we'll be able to not take their behavior, especially if it's a bit challenging, like we'll not take that personally because we know the context. And so that's actually also going to be a gift for your child, because they will have a teacher who understands them and who is going to work with them, not against them. So music can be an incredibly supportive and empowering space for children as well, who don't always feel understood in traditional academic or school settings. But this only really happens if the teacher knows the truth and knows what's going on. So if you've been wondering whether to speak up, consider this podcast a gentle nudge. And if you're not sure how your teacher will respond, just ask them. And a good teacher will welcome the insight and will thank you for sharing it with them. So that's all that I've got for today. And so thanks for listening to this episode of the Raising Musos. If you found this helpful, please share it with another parent, or leave a review or a comment on this YouTube video or on social media. If you have any questions or any particular topics you would like me to talk about in future episodes, please let me know. You can send me a message on Instagram. My handle is @MusicMakersAcademy. So up until next time, keep raising your little muso, or musos if you have multiple, and remember that every child can shine with the right support. See you later. Bye.